Welcome to the Nurse Break and the Nurses Collective podcast. I'm your host, Jackson, a registered nurse, and I'm thrilled to have you here. Each episode, we speak with Aussie nurses exploring their incredible careers. So grab your favourite drink, get comfortable, and remember, if you're watching this live, feel free to drop your questions in the comments for our guest. Let's get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live webinar streamed via Nurses Collective and the Nurse Break. I'm Jackson, a registered nurse, and I want to begin by thanking you for being here, whether you're tuning in live, watching the replay, or listening to our podcast version later. Please post in the comments where you guys are right now watching this from. I'd love to know. And tonight's conversation will explore the realities of nursing in conflict zones, particularly JP's recent humanitarian deployments to Gaza with the Red Cross. While the content we're discussing is incredibly important, I want to acknowledge that it may be distressing and confronting at times. I encourage everyone to listen with empathy and respect for the people and communities who are affected. If you have a question for JP as we go, please 100% feel free to drop them in the chat on Facebook, and I'll endeavour to deal with them throughout this interview, or we'll get him to answer them if he can at a later date. And a quick reminder, the Nurse Break, for those who don't know, is our broader platform for sharing nursing blogs, interviews, and insights from nurses across Australia. And Nurses Collective is our private professional online community, a space for Aussie nurses and students to learn, share, and connect. Both are easy to find via a Google search. Now, let's jump in. So JP has years of experience as an emergency and trauma nurse in Australia, and has deployed with the Red Cross and Red Crescent to South Sudan, Bangladesh, Syria, Papua New Guinea, my apologies. And but with all those experiences, Gaza, as you'll hear tonight, is something else entirely. So JP, thank you for being with us tonight. And before we delve into the deeper stuff, I just wanted to break the ice before we introduce you a little bit further. Look, you've worked in some crazy, intense parts of the world. What's been the most unexpectedly beautiful place you've ever deployed to?
Yeah, I would think it was probably Syria. I remember being kind of really surprised in the capital in Damascus at how kind of beautiful and ornate some of the areas were, and kind of walking through the local markets there. And yeah, it was incredibly beautiful. Took my breath away in that sense. I didn't expect it at all, especially kind of given the conflict that they endured during that time. So that was a big surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so can you tell us a bit about yourself? How are you here? How did you get to where you are, and I guess step into humanitarian nursing?
Yeah, obviously I've got my background in emergency nursing, and I don't know, I kind of became interested in the humanitarian sector probably back in around 2010. So at that time, I kind of started reaching out to other people I knew, or kind of met through different connections that were working in that area, and kind of just expressed my interest to kind of understand a little bit about how I could become involved. And I think probably what ended up making me kind of more enthusiastic about working in this area was really kind of came down to traveling around. I kind of did a lot of travel at that stage of my life. I kind of got to know other cultures, and I did some volunteer work in Guatemala, kind of up in the highlands with this Belgian organization. And that was, I guess, my first introduction to working in a resource limited environment, working internationally, somewhere where kind of access to medical care was extremely limited. And that, I think, was quite a foundational experience for me. It was really an eye opener to kind of, I guess, the brutal health inequities that exist, and the struggles of kind of accessing healthcare in remote areas. And I guess I kind of hated the injustice of it all. That we had such an amazing healthcare system at home, and just by living in a different area, kind of meant that you didn't have those kind of same accesses, those same kind of rights, which I found confronting, and I guess humanitarian work gave me an opportunity, gave me an outlet to kind of help address some of those concerns.
Some of your colleagues, I guess, do you find that as a common sort of route into this space? Do you find that's like a common theme, or?
It's strange. There seems to be kind of no direct, like, I don't know, everyone has their own kind of pathway into kind of the humanitarian response, and I understand that there's a lot of people that will do maybe one deployment and then that's kind of enough. It's kind of more they're after that experience of working overseas once, but it's actually quite a small community, I think, that kind of keep going and stick with it, because it comes with a lot of challenges. So it's not for everyone in that sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. You've just looking at some of the things you've done. You're a trauma educator. Is that correct? You do quite a bit of education as well now.
From the Red Cross side, I've kind of helped carry out some emergency response trauma courses. I haven't got an official education background here in Australia. Like I don't work within the education sector in that sense, but within your humanitarian work, you're often doing kind of teaching and education, and that is part of the job.
Yeah, right. Okay. So one of the questions I want to ask you is, what kind of presentations or training, preparation, do you go through before being deployed to somewhere like Gaza, into a humanitarian crisis conflict zone?
Yeah, I mean, when you are I can speak from the Red Cross perspective. When you kind of recruited, they have like this special course called Impact, which is international mobilization and preparation for action. So it's all about kind of orientation to the Red Cross movement, to the understanding the principles of Red Cross and how we work, different frameworks, how surge initiatives kind of function, how funding works for disasters, and different roles within, I guess, the Red Cross movement. Kind of, they have special like community engagement and accountability, protection, gender inclusion. You also kind of learn about, I guess, the fundamentals of international humanitarian law, security, different elements of this, and I guess like challenges that you might encounter working in that in the humanitarian space. There is some specialized training that you often do for kind of hostile environments. So there's a really good course that's run by Red R, which often delegates will get put through this course, which is all about working in conflict zones, working in kind of crisis, personal security, and how you kind of manage those difficult situations. And it's a mix of kind of classroom-based stuff and then simulation-based to, I guess it's a really good course to give you an idea of whether you are prepared to work in these kind of environments, because it can be quite confronting and challenging, and there are risks that sometimes people don't think about. There is other specialized training within kind of the Red Cross movement, which is called like ERU, emergency response unit training, which is all about how you set up a field hospital and how a hospital functions and kind of mass casualty response. And because these hospitals come as kind of a pre-packaged, prepackaged system ready to go. So it's all set up on the ground. Other things that Red Cross do really to help us with our kind of preparation is we have to undergo psychological briefings. So often we'll have these when you're recruited, but also kind of pre and post deployment, where you'll talk about the potential kind of challenges you're anticipating, what your coping mechanisms are, and kind of how you can kind of work through some of these challenges that you might see on the ground. And then the last element would probably be kind of security briefings, again, that you, depending on the context, you might have pre-deployment, or you might have in country, or you might have both. And then I'd say the last thing is kind of really just your prior experience. It's when I was recruited to Red Cross was kind of in the middle of the Ebola outbreaks, and there was kind of we had a little bit of talk about whether I could be involved in a response like that, but it's quite a challenging deployment, especially as a first deployment. It was like a non-contact mission. Psychologically, I think quite difficult, confronting, having quite a few deaths on the ground. So like that kind of deployment was was red lighted for me in that sense, and I ended up doing a different deployment as my first. So going into a context like Gaza, it's not going to be something that we would normally see someone on their first deployment. They want you to be familiar with the kind of humanitarian sector and those kind of existing challenges without the added kind of security and other complexities, I guess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Did you feel like for your first deployment you were prepared by that training, or there were still things you're like caught off guard, I guess, a little bit by it?
I got thrown in the deep end. I kind of ended up, and it was, again, it's kind of circumstance, but I ended up deploying before I'd done the training. So okay. Yeah, there was a lot of things I was kind of learning on the fly in that sense, in South Sudan, and kind of how Red Cross operated. So things are not always perfect. And everyone has their own kind of experience in that sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My next question is, when you were preparing, to deploy to Gaza, I guess, and we see this in the news a lot currently, I think even just the other day, how did it feel about being told, your safety can't be guaranteed, especially when you see news reports of the things that are going on against healthcare workers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Like, Gaza is an incredibly insecure context, and there's nowhere safe in Gaza. And so going in, we're told that we have a security briefing, and we're essentially told that our security can't be guaranteed. And so there are elements about that you have to take into consideration when you take on a deployment like this, and you talk to your loved ones, and you have to make sure that everyone's, I guess, aware of these circumstances. I do make sure my affairs are in order, and I have an up-to-date will. I never had a will before I started working for Red Cross. Having said that, ICRC take security incredibly seriously. There's a lot of passive and active security measures that they use in the field to try and kind of mitigate any risks. So there's we have safe rooms, and kind of in the hospital and in the residence where we are. There's a bullet-resistant film placed on all kind of windows and things like this. They have these sandbag walls and mesh wire placed around the field hospital in kind of strategic locations to try and maximize safety. And that's developed over time. They've even kind of constructed some ad hoc brick walls to try and increase safety and safe areas in the hospital. You often have curfews and movement restrictions, and I mean, in Gaza you can't move anywhere, so you're really just in the hospital or in the house. And then a big side of protection or security wise, I guess, is this the protective emblem of the Red Cross. So, you know, on top of the hospital, you have these big red crosses, these which, you know, to clearly mark our location. There's Red Cross is also often they're having dialogue with all the parties to make sure they're understanding any changing context, that they know kind of that any movements that we're doing into the territory are kind of planned and coordinated, and that kind of our location, I guess, is also deconflicted. So people know where we are. I think like, obviously when I go into these contexts, I am nervous. Like, I think that's normal. And I think I would normally like get a lot of reassurance from the protections that healthcare workers and hospitals are meant to be granted under Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law. The unfortunate reality, though, is that we're seeing a breakdown of that protection, kind of globally, but particularly in Gaza, and we're seeing like this loss of respect for IHL. So, so you have to go in kind of being aware of that. And there's an element of, when I do take on a deployment, I guess I rationalize it to myself in the sense that this I'm going into this context for a finite period of time. I do have an exit date. The humanitarian needs are quite extreme, and I think that makes it a little bit easier for me. And, you know, I think of the Palestinian nationals that I come alongside, that they're there day in and day out. They've had 21 months of this, so they have no reprieve. And I don't know, maybe I kind of balance off that a little bit. I'm going in for 4 weeks. It's feasible.
So what were your first impressions when you got into Gaza? Both, you know, as a nurse and just as a person.
Yeah, look, so I've done 3 deployments now, and obviously, like, the context is somewhat changing each time. But I know, kind of on my first deployment in, we crossed the border via Egypt, so we were going over the kind of Sinai Peninsula, and I remember seeing like this huge line of aid trucks just waiting at the border, waiting to get in. And I think, like, I'd never seen that before. And seeing that alone made me go, shit, these needs must be huge. Like, we're just waiting for this to get in. I think, kind of secondly, you cross the border and you see the level of destruction, and that's difficult to comprehend. There's a lot of rubble and dust and twisted metal and entire buildings that are just kind of been decimated. And it's apocalyptic in a sense. And I think, last I kind of read, I think like 92% of housing in Gaza has been destroyed. So really, it's a bit of a wasteland, and like, then you get to a hospital. When I got to kind of European Gaza hospital, where my first deployment was, I remember being shocked by the amount of children, but almost 50% of the population's under 18 years old. So I probably shouldn't have been as shocked as I was, but I think it's different when you're there and you're living it. A lot of the national staff I was working with were kind of in their 20s, and You know, I was old in Gaza in comparison to, and yeah, I mean, from the nursing point of view, kind of the workloads are huge. You know, you've got patients with severe injuries. They've got large weapon wounds. They've got burns. They're requiring significant surgical kind of interventions. You know, they're having skin grafts and things like this, and you're doing all this with less resources, and that's definitely kind of an overwhelming element of it.
So I guess to add to that, just to expand a little bit more, what kind of injuries are you seeing? You know, and did you see?
Yeah, I mean, you're predominantly kind of seeing penetrating trauma typically, but I guess your mechanism differs. So the predominant mechanisms you're seeing are kind of gunshot wounds, you're seeing explosive blast injuries, you're seeing shrapnel wounds, and you're seeing there's also like these fragmentation bombs that we see patients come in with injuries from that. So they're like these munitions that have, I don't know, ball bearings or something in them, and they shoot out in like a huge, large radius. They're incredibly lethal, but like the amount of damage that they cause to people. Sorry, my cat is
bring the cat up.
He's run away. And I've kind of lost my train of thought a bit, but so you've got all these different mechanisms, and you're kind of seeing everything you can imagine, like from the blast trauma, you're seeing, you know, pneumothorax, hemothorax, you're seeing gastrointestinal perforations, a lot of people with ruptured eardrums and things like this. There's, you know, a lot of foreign bodies from the debris and fragmentation from shrapnel. So fractures, broken bones, internal bleeding, soft tissue injuries, nerve injuries, spinal injuries, head injuries. There's certain things that the Red Cross team normally don't, are kind of deemed out of our scope. So kind of the spinal and the head injuries will refer on, but you're kind of seeing everything else. Burns as well. There's a significant amount of burns.
When you say refer on, like what does that mean? What does that look like when you're there?
Yeah, so like we're a field hospital, so we're not part of the national health system. The national health system has been. Oh, sorry, that's him. See if we can calm him down. So the national health system is somewhat still functional. You know, it changes over time, and kind of the field hospital has a relationship. It's working, you know, with the approval of the Ministry of Health.
Gotcha. Yep.
And they have specialties. So and Red Cross always works with its national society. So we have the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. They run part of the ambulance service. So we would often refer patients via the ambulance service to those other facilities as needed. Our hospital doesn't have an intensive care unit. So if a patient required intensive care, or if they required neurosurgery, or, you know, they had some kind of spinal injury, then they would be referred on. Yeah, there's kind of strict criteria with what we see and what we don't.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess you've got some photos. Can you tell us a little bit about the field hospital? I guess what a typical day, a few things. What is the hospital? So tell us about the hospital, what a typical day on deployment looks like, and let me know, and I can get the photos up on screen.
Yeah, I don't know. Do I need to flick through them, or probably?
There you go. I think you'll
yeah, so our hospital is what's called a type 2 inpatient surgical emergency care hospital. Like, there's different classifications done by the World Health Organization, and I guess like minimum standards of what you need to meet and what services you need to provide to be classified as one of these hospitals. I'll try and so that's the hospital there that you can see. So it's a 24-hour service. We have an emergency department. We have kind of, I guess, two rooms, one that we call yellow and one that we call red. So resus is red and yellow is kind of the acute tent. Yeah. And I mean, we can do triage, we can do trauma management, all your generic kind of ED things. We can do some advanced life support. We can intubate patients, but because we don't have that intensive care unit, patients will either have to go directly to OT for management and then be extubated, or they get referred on, or sometimes we'll do damage control surgery and then they'll be referred on post. From a surgical capacity wise, we kind of do general surgery, obstetric surgery, but predominantly it's trauma. We have two operating rooms, and I can probably find some photos. That's before the hospital was created. That's one of the operating rooms. And there's kind of, I guess, numbers like of how many surgeries you're meant to be able to perform, being a type 2 field hospital. So you're meant to be able to do 7 major surgeries a day or 15 minor surgeries. In reality, our team is doing, upwards of 20, 30 plus surgeries a day. That's kind of been exponential in the last few months. I'm not on top of what the current numbers are, but it's dramatically increased. We have an X-ray room, just a basic X-ray. We have a laboratory where we can do kind of basic pathology, but we don't have things like electrolytes. We don't have blood gases. And we do have a blood bank, so we can transfuse patients, but again, it's like there's limited supplies. We have multiple wards. So we have a male ward, a female ward, pediatric ward, maternity ward. Our hospital started as a 60-bed facility. However, the inpatient capacity is, from what I've been told, since May, it's been increased to around 120 plus patients, just because of an increase in needs with mass casualty incidents occurring. We also have an outpatient department that could see anywhere between 500 patients on the deployments I was there, but I've heard that more recently it's kind of seeing double that amount. As you can see, that the hospital itself is just kind of, it's canvas tents, so there's little protection, but there's sandbags and whatnot put up around. I don't know if on this one you can. I didn't organize the photos very well.
No stress at all.
I think you also what a typical day would look like. I mean, no 100% typical day, and kind of depends on the deployment as well. But in Gaza, we were kind of getting up quite early in the morning. You'd normally have a 7 a.m. morning meeting with all the staff. We'd have like a nursing and medical handover. One of our big things was making sure we had updated allocations for mass casualty incidents, so making sure everyone knew what their role was, always being prepared in this sense. And a lot of it was about checking stocks, supplies. We created certain kits to be prepared. So we had chest drain kits ready. We had medication kits with kind of tranexamic acid and cefazolin, because they were kind of the predominant kind of medications we're using in that mass casualty response. daily equipment checks, and then you kind of, a lot of it's just about kind of overseeing the flow of patients, supporting your national colleagues, assisting in that kind of daily patient care, reviewing documentation, and kind of processes from getting from the ED to either the theatre or to the ward, or transferred in rare occasions. But I mean, each day was different.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Look, do you want me to take the photos off, or do you want to?
Up to you. I don't know.
We got a few more. What else we got there? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of those will become relevant as we talk. I think that's kind of some mass casualty exercises we did.
Kind of. For those who are watching, please post in the comments any thoughts, questions, queries, and also where you're watching this from. That'd be really good. Okay, next question, JP, was what are the biggest challenges of working in and we've kind of doubled it a little bit. What are the biggest challenges in a resource-deprived high conflict zone?
Yeah. I mean, I thought about this a lot, and I mean, the short answer is that, in a high conflict and resource deprived environment, healthcare is extremely difficult, and essentially, this kind of situation compromises the delivery of healthcare. Insecurity undermines the delivery of healthcare, and it does that on several fronts. So it can obstruct patient access to hospitals. Individuals are unable to reach medical facilities. It impacts patient transport, so whether patients can be collected from the scene, or they're delayed in their arrival to the hospital, or delayed in referral because of insecurity. So movement is a big thing, and if you look at a map of Gaza at the moment, it's something like 88% of the territory is kind of no-go zones. So it's not safe to go to those areas. So that inherently affects movement significantly. The insecurity also affects our staffing. Sometimes our staff are unable to reach the hospital. There was often kind of evacuation zones that kind of get announced, and it's like kind of 24 hours or whatever notice, and our staff have to prioritize their safety. They have to and the safety of their families. So there's huge impacts like that. But I mean, that's kind of, those things are kind of happening outside the hospital, but I guess within the hospital as well, like the security can essentially affect staff in the nature that potentially sometimes we have to suspend providing care to ensure that we're safe. Security can override clinical care. It's an extremely difficult thing to do, but we do need to think about our safety. We saw this kind of manifest in the hospital. There was the danger of stray bullets entering the hospital compound. So sometimes we'd have to relocate to a safe room. We saw the staff numbers reduce at different times. It was maybe about a month ago or so, like late May, that there was a 13-year-old boy, a young boy in our hospital, and he was hit by a stray bullet. He was hit in the head. He had significant injury. Again, we don't have intensive care. We don't have neurosurgery. So he got transferred out very quickly. And he ended up dying a week later, and that's horrific. And he was in an area that's, a hospital's meant to be a safe place. And like, this goes further. You look at the Gaza territory as a whole. We've seen attacks on healthcare facilities. We've seen healthcare workers killed. When I was there during my last deployment in April, there was the brutal killing of 15 medical and humanitarian personnel 8 of whom worked for the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. And we know healthcare work is not meant to be a target. They're protected under IHL, and these are staff and volunteers who were essentially, risking their lives to provide support for others. And so it's extremely distressing. The national healthcare system is partly functioning, but to an extent, it's also in ruins. You have 34 of 35 national hospitals have been damaged. 17 are partially functional. 12 are not functioning at all. 6 have been completely destroyed. There's no hospitals in the north of Gaza and in the south in Rafah. Our field hospitals in the south, and field hospitals are trying to restore some of the capacity that's been lost, but it's not a long-term solution, and it's essentially like a temporary fix. So there's huge concerns with, this kind of healthcare in danger. Now, the other side of the question is kind of working, in the resource-deprived setting, and that comes down to that, we're trying to function without the sufficient supplies that we need. So we're missing basic consumables like gloves and gauze and sutures, bandages. We have significant shortages in medications, analgesics, antibiotics, vaccinations. Ambulances don't have fuel to be able to operate, so people are starting to have to arrive to the hospital on foot. The infrastructure across the territory for kind of water and sanitation is also affected. And then there's kind of, public health concerns in this regard, because you have crowded dwellings, people are living in tents that don't have sanitation facilities. So we see an increased burden in public health related illnesses, which further impacts kind of a healthcare system that is compromised. So, it's how do you move forward when you have significant insecurity and the lack of resources? It's extremely challenging. We were swapping supplies with different organizations. If we had excess of something and they had shortage of it, and perhaps they had something that they could give to us, you're looking at where you can improvise equipment and things. We haven't been able to get crutches into Gaza, so we have a carpenter who's making crutches out of wooden pallets. You're rationing your supplies, you're recycling things where you can, where, at home, those things would be thrown away. I see your next question's already popped up.
Yeah. It was a seamless transition, I guess. And for those who are listening, it's and we've kind of touched it, how do the conditions on the ground affect clinical standards, gold standard versus, the standard, the minimum acceptable standard.
I think you don't want your clinical standards to disappear. So you're doing everything you can to kind of maintain those, but you're having to adapt to the context, and a lot of that is kind of reflected in your lack of resources. So, I can think of some examples. We had a significant shortage of tetanus toxoid vaccination. Now, at home, we'd give that to anyone that's got a wound that's open, whatnot. Even if it's maybe they've had a booster and a few years ago, we'd probably give them another. Ideal scenario, we'd like to give tetanus to everyone that has a weapon wound, but we had a significant shortage. So you need to kind of reflect and go, well, who needs this the most? Who can do without? And so in this circumstance, we developed like an age-specific protocol. I think it was like less than 18 months and then kind of older than 35 years. And it was because within that bracket, we considered those people to have greater protection and kind of existing immunization. It's not a perfect response. You want to be able to give tetanus to everyone, but when you're in a situation where you have to choose and you have to kind of put some parameters on it, and then you get to, and then you might even still run out of your supply. So it's incredibly difficult in that sense. I also said before, you kind of recycling and reusing different items. The infection control is also kind of something that you really want to strive to maintain, but it is more difficult in this context. We were even limited with the cleaning products that we had in the hospital. So we looked at different infection control measures, and sometimes it was about physically isolating certain patients. We had some Pseudomonas infections in some wounds, so those patients would be kind of segregated. We looked at putting mosquito nets on bed frames for patients to kind of, because we did have some wounds kind of get maggot infestations. So then you're looking at whatever you can do to try and maintain that environment. And I guess the other really big adaptation is I work in a level 1 trauma center that has resources galore. Here we don't have a CT scanner. We don't have all those blood tests. We had one ultrasound. So a lot of the clinical decision making is then guided by clinical examination of by your doctors and whatnot. So you could have a patient that you're not exactly sure what trajectory they might go, and you normally send them for a CT scan, and you'll be like, yep, let's take them to the theatre. Instead, we decide we keep them for a period of observation, and we watch and wait, or you decide and you go in and you do definitive surgical management. So it kind of evolves in that sense. But you really just got to kind of, your decisions are guided by, I guess, this pragmatic element and being flexible and I guess harm reduction wherever you can. Mass casualty events are extremely challenging for this because you're overwhelmed during those points. So your clinical priorities kind of change, and you go to life-saving interventions taking precedence, and you can't do everything for everyone. And so your care decisions kind of end up being based on helping the most amount of people.
Wow. Okay. The next question is a bit of a sideways step. And for those who can't read it or are listening later, what did you feel for the first time you heard shelling or realized how close the conflict was to your clinical space? And obviously you've talked about stray bullets.
I think it was even before I reached the clinical space. The first time I was crossing kind of the border into Gaza, I remember hearing kind of gunfire and some explosions on the other side, and I thought, what am I getting myself into? But I was with some other colleagues. I was with a surgeon who was returning. I was with a doctor who'd kind of recently been in Ukraine, which is another kind of difficult and a conflict context. So I mean, I was nervous. And I'd be, I can't say that I wasn't scared at, certain points. I think I had made the decision that the needs are immense, and that I'd like to go back and, that I'd like to go in and help. And the conflict is kind of, it's very ever present. You're hearing drones all the time. kind of there. It's kind of a constant noise. You'll hear the whistles of a missile, and then kind of the landing, and then the ground will shake or the windows will rattle, or you'll see the smoke in kind of a few hundred meters away. And yeah, like I said, our guards would often find kind of stray bullets around the hospital compound.
So, was there a moment where you questioned whether you could keep going?
Yes and no. There was a really intense day on my last deployment in April, and I'd only been there around 2 weeks at this point, and we had a mass casualty event. We received 29 patients in a very short period of time. It was quite chaotic, and it seems strange to say 29 patients now, because I know that the hospital has received a mass casualty response of 249 patients. So
yeah, right. Okay.
I think of my colleagues there. Like I was there for a small mass casualty incident, and I think the largest one I was involved in was maybe 50 or 60. But anyway, it was I think we had quite a few red cases come in. I think it was like 11 red cases, so resuscitation patients, multiple of them being kind of critical, requiring chest drains. We intubated one. 6 of them ended up needing kind of emergency surgery. And it was during this time that we were responding that there was a huge bang, and the ground shook, and it was actually a tank shell that had gone through and a Red Cross premises that was just maybe 200 or 300 meters away. I didn't know at the time what had happened. It was only once we kind of finished our care and kind of retired to the safe room at that point
that you realized.
And so we had a lot of kind of meetings and discussions post this incident, and kind of what measures do we need to do, like change, from I guess our organizational response to it, because it was a significant hit. And it wasn't really a question of whether I could keep going, but I had, and it sounds almost absurd to say, but I had this fear that I was going to be sent home. I'd only just arrived after a few weeks. I thought ICRC might send me home, or Australian Red Cross might pull me. And I if that happened, that happened. I'd accept it. And within 48 hours, we had gone from 22 delegates down to 12. So I was one of the 12 that remained. And that was purely based on kind of, I guess, role allocation in the end, but based on mathematics as well, like less people equals less organizational risk. And that's how we can manage it. So, yeah, I was grateful to be able to stay and continue to help my colleagues at that point. And yeah, I think that's all I've got.
Yeah, no, I think you've thoroughly answered that question. Now, we've talked about this question in advance, I guess, a little bit, like you've had some time to think about it, but I wanted to ask you, can you share about, some moments or people, patients, that have stayed with you after you've left? And just before you answer, there's clearly some people in the comments who have worked with you, and I'll just put them up on screen. And I think, it just demonstrates.
I know.
It demonstrates, the impact that you can have at a personal level. Just for those who are watching, here are some of the comments on screen. So thank you for those who are commenting. Keep the comments coming. All those who are watching, we appreciate it. Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, patient kind of stories, patient moments, there's kind of too many in that sense.
Yeah.
Like so many harrowing stories. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking kind of like it's probably the kind of encounters with children that are the most confronting and the hard ones to forget. Because I think we can agree that in the setting of conflict, children are extremely vulnerable and innocent, and so to see them injured is really quite distressing. Pediatrics is also not a specialty I'm super familiar with at all either, so it's kind of it's more challenging for me personally. And I remember, like, one of the cases on my last deployment was this young 5-year-old girl that was kind of carried into us by a family member, and she was in an altered conscious state. She had a piece of shrapnel that had kind of gone into the back of her head. She wasn't really breathing very well. She was bradycardic. So we kind of did our things. We cannulated her. We ended up sedating her, and we intubated. And like I say, we don't have intensive care or neurosurgical capability at the field hospital. So she was transported out. She went to European Gaza Hospital, which was functioning at this stage, but is since I've left, it's been evacuated, and it's now a non-functional hospital. And she had a CT scan over there, and she had this large kind of left intracerebral bleed. And she ended up being transferred back to our facility after an intensive care stay. And that was because her father was a patient in our hospital. And so we kind of had her on our pediatric ward for a few more kind of days. But at this time she was nonverbal, and she had like this right-sided deficit. So she had this weakness in her right side, predominantly in her arm, but her gait was a little bit off as well. And she was on antibiotics, and she'd been placed on anticonvulsant medication too. But I don't know. I just remember thinking kind of what kind of outcome will she have? What's the future look like for that? She doesn't have access to kind of rehabilitation services and things like this. So, yeah, I mean, it was really, like, it was nice to know that we contributed to her survival, but equally distressing to see kind of where does she go from here.
Okay.
And she's not the only one. That's there's I can tell you another. I don't know how much you want me to talk on this. Or
no, like, yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think the only word is distressing. So a logical follow-on would be, how have you looked after your own mental health? And what has helped you cope, after coming home to Melbourne, you go to a shift at your hospital in Melbourne, like that just must hit.
Yeah, I would agree in the sense that I think coming home is the extremely difficult part. It's difficult to convey kind of what you've seen and witnessed and experienced and felt, and probably even harder than that is kind of saying goodbye to your Palestinian colleagues, that don't have any reprieve in 21 months now. and you feel a bit guilty that you've come back to these circumstances. So the work, definitely stays with you. It is hard to let go. I think there's an element of that I find being easier when I'm there, because I'm kind of actively helping. Whereas when I'm home, I've kind of become an observer. I'm seeing the news, and you feel powerless. I'm sure many people kind of that are seeing the news and social media, and many people feel powerless. Kind of, what can we do? And I guess that's the real benefit of, I guess, the humanitarian work, that I can kind of flip it, and I become like an active participant, and I can kind of help in things. When I'm away, you have a really good team. I tend to kind of make a WhatsApp group with loved ones and friends and family, and I kind of I keep in contact with them, and I let them know all the difficult things I'm experiencing, and that helps me kind of deal with it at the time. And it means I don't have to necessarily explain or elaborate on things when I get home. They've kind of lived it with me in that sense somewhat. I also take a whole lot of Polaroid photos and put them on the wall, and make things a bit homely. And so there's different things that I kind of do to look after myself, but
Look, I had a question about, what was the first thing you did when you got home from Gaza? I think we'll skip that. I think that's a question we don't need to dwell over. I guess what I did want to sort of cover is, a lot of people may not understand exactly how impactful and what their values really mean. So can you sort of discuss what are the Red Cross humanitarian values and how do they come into play?
Red Cross itself it's got like this amazing rich history, and it's like something I find incredibly fascinating. And the movement was kind of born out of conflict itself. There was this battle of Solferino in Italy, and 23,000 dead, and this man Henry Dunant came about, and he saw the carnage of this battle, and he kind of came up with these two proposals. One being, groups of volunteers in each country who could kind of care for the wounded during wartime, and the other one was this idea of a government treaty that would recognizing the people that are protecting kind of those that are providing aid, and then also those that have been wounded. And so, like, from Red Cross, we've ended up with the Geneva Conventions, we've ended up with international humanitarian law, and we've got this legally protected international symbol. And it's actually like restricted use, the Red Cross, which I never knew until I kind of became involved. And then you've got the Red Cross principles, and kind of there's 7 fundamental principles, but there's 4 of them that are predominant kind of among the humanitarian sector, and kind of how most humanitarian organizations will operate. And so one of those is neutrality. So the idea that you don't take sides in hostilities. My cat's gone to get food. The other one is you've got impartiality, so that that the aid you provide is needs based, and it's kind of it's done without discrimination. Independence, so like that what you are doing is autonomous of any kind of political or military objective. and then the core principle being humanity, that like the whole purpose of what you're doing is about alleviating suffering, helping maintain dignity for populations that are affected. So all this kind of filters down into what we do. That principle of humanity predominantly kind of we're seeing all this suffering. So we're seeing it in the news. So like that's kind of our main focus in that sense. And Red Cross has like I guess it's got quite a unique position because of its history. So I think that two of the big things that I kind of see Red Cross and also other organizations can do, though, is this kind of, you've got this healthcare in danger element that we talked about. So, calling for respect and adherence to international humanitarian law. And that call's kind of got stronger as this conflict has progressed. And then kind of this, I guess, also advocating for the basic needs of the civilian population are met, that we see kind of that humanitarian flow of aid enter unhindered to those people in need. There's significant shortfalls for basic needs at the moment. Food insecurity, water insecurity. There's widespread displacement. So humanitarian aid needs to be kind of done at scale, but even more importantly, it needs to be done according to the humanitarian principles. So what we talked about: impartiality, neutrality, independence. And it should be done in a safe and dignified manner, and it should be done by organizations that have track records and experience in this kind of work. And the unfortunate reality, what we're seeing at the moment, is we are seeing people dying trying to access aid. We're seeing people dying trying to access food. So we've got some things to work on, I guess.
I'll pop some of the other comments up on screen. Lucy Miller. Thank you, Kath, for watching from Christmas Island. My next question is, how has just, all this experience changed how you relate to people, colleagues, patients back in Australia?
Yeah, I think with patients, I don't think it's had a big influence. I mean, I think if anyone works in an emergency department, they kind of know what one patient considers to be an emergency can be vastly different to what another patient considers an emergency to be. So that can be testing at times, working in different areas when I've got my own idea of what an emergency is. And that's just something you have to take on board, and that's just patience, and everyone has their own needs, and we try to help them through their difficult days. With colleagues, I think people are interested and curious about the work that I've been doing, and people are glad when I've come home safe and appreciative of the work. And I think with loved ones even more. I think in general, these kind of experiences probably, I think they just make you realize how fortunate we are and how amazing our healthcare system is. And I don't know, sometimes just how absurd the world is. It's there's definitely part of me that's frustrated to see this conflict continue day in and day out.
So I guess following on directly from that is, what's a story you wish, the world could hear from your time in Gaza? What's something you wish the media knew about your story? Or, not necessarily your story, but, the nationals with you, the people with you there.
Yeah. There's one story that, like, I'll never forget. And it's kind of, it's still ongoing. It started on my kind of first deployment back in February 2024. And it involved a young man in his 20s. He's a software engineer. And when I met him, he was more or less bedbound. He'd been transferred from another hospital in the north, from Al Shifa, down to the European Gaza hospital, and he'd been, I guess, involved in an airstrike in November of 2023. So already this was 3 months down from when he'd been injured. He had approximately 25% total body surface area burns, partial and full thickness, mostly to one of his legs and to his back. When I met him, he was malnourished. He was kind of in this catabolic state. He was kind of chronic form of sepsis. There was multiple we'd have fevers. We needed to give him blood transfusions because he was anemic. He needed antibiotics. He was having frequent change of dressings. Every 2 days, he was having dressings done in the operating room, like under sedation. So, like, huge needs. He was trying to get permission to go into to kind of leave Gaza for medical care. He'd kind of applied for that, but he had no luck. And he was a patient during my entire deployment there. Come kind of September 2024 is when I went back. And at this stage, I went back to the field hospital that ICRC had set up, and they'd set that up in May. So after my first deployment, and I came across the same young man. He'd been kind of transferred to the field hospital when it was evacuated. This time he had a lot more color in his face. He was in a much better situation. A lot of his wounds had improved, but he'd required skin grafts. So he had new donor sites, and they were not all healing particularly well. He was still having regular operations, maybe every 3 days at this point. And at this point, he was now like 10 or 11 months into his kind of, I guess, recovery in hospital, 11 months in hospital. He still hadn't received a green light for medical evacuation. But he was improving. I saw him walk unassisted. He even walked down to the beach one day with his caretaker. Sometimes we'd have coffee in the evenings, and kind of he'd just tell me about his life before the war and his aspirations for the future and different things. So quite incredible, but also, I guess I don't know everybody's story like I know his story, because he could talk English, and you don't have time to get to know all your patients in the same way. But I guess I dedicated a bit of time to him because I knew him from my first deployment. And he a lot of his family, his mother and his sister, are outside of Gaza, and then he had another sister somewhere else in Gaza. So he didn't really have a caretaker around with him. And I remember there was this other young guy who was there helping look after him. And he wasn't family or anything. His uncle, this caretaker, his uncle had been a patient in the hospital, and he'd met this young man, and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna help be your caretaker now, and caretakers kind of help them with food and help them with activities of daily living and things like this. That kind of nursing role is some of that's kind of carried over to the caretaker. And I mean, for me, that was incredibly heartwarming to see, like, that level of community and to see strangers helping each other out in that sense. And like, I've never seen anything like that in Australia. And this guy would be there every day to help him. Come February 2025, the young man had been discharged from hospital. That's after 16 months in hospital recovering. He still had some kind of small wounds, but nothing that required him to stay in hospital. You know, we've got kind of a WhatsApp group, and that people would send a message out, and he's incredibly tall, this guy, and his face was full of color, and he's smiling, and he kind of sent a message, and yeah, I do. Yeah, with him I do.
That's
and
cool.
he's been reunited with his sister. Up in Gaza City. Now we're in August, but I think kind of our last communication was last month, and it's distressing. He tells me that it's become unbearably severe in Gaza, that he's hungry, that he's eating very little, that food prices are very high and he can't afford anything. He hasn't no money, and that he doesn't know if he'll survive. You know, he's went 3 days without food. So I don't know, like, it's obviously like you think you can survive 16 months and then you can die because you don't have any food. And I mean, this is just one person. Like, so, you know, I think it's near impossible for us to really comprehend what people are enduring, and, you know, the trauma that everyone has experienced. There's not anyone that's not been touched.
And I think the world is to an extent seeing this, not at the level you're articulating, but you see the world responding right now to, you know, your one single example of you know. So yeah, look, thank you for sharing that story. I know that was maybe one of the first few times you've done that, so that was hard to listen to. I can only imagine how hard that was to share. So I think, like, I've interviewed people in the humanitarian space, nurses. I've interviewed you in the past. I've interviewed quite a few nurses on the Nurse Break. I think to an extent, people underestimate and over-glorify humanitarian nursing. You hear your story right now. I think, you know, the next question is about what advice you'd give to nursing students, to, you know, to your colleagues, to my colleagues who wanted to get into humanitarian nursing, who may not realize, you know, what they're wishing to get themselves into. You know, like, can you touch on that at all? Like, I'll put the question up on the screen, but I guess I want you to talk to nurses. Like, what is it people are actually going to need to be ready to experience? Like, you know, what advice do you have for people?
I mean, and maybe this plays into the fact that, you know, it's, I don't know. I mean, look, it's incredibly difficult work, and it's challenging, and there's a certain skill set that is useful to go into it. And I think being kind of open-minded and adaptive and flexible, you want to be passionate about it. It's not something you just want to kind of, I don't know, like. I think a passion for it helps. There's also elements of it like that.
No, sorry, I was going to say, you say people go in multiple, you're one who's gone on many, and some only go on one. What is it about those who go on many?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a toll that it can take, because you're having these experiences that are difficult to convey to others, and there's an element of that that's hard to convey, and that can take toll in relationships. And there can be like reverse culture shock, and you feel maybe people don't understand you, and in that sense, it kind of makes it a bit insular, that other people that do multiple deployments or whatnot, you kind of, they understand what you're experiencing a bit, and often these are the people you're debriefing with, but it's incredibly rewarding work. I think it's incredibly worthwhile. I'd encourage people to become involved, but you also need to remember that you don't choose where to go. This is needs based. You can't be like, I'm going to do humanitarian work just because I want to do X. It's like it's wider than that. It's broader than that. In that sense, it's just about, I want to help humanity, and where there's disaster, crisis, or conflict, then that's where I'm willing to go and to help. You have to know what your own, I guess, borders are, and kind of what you're comfortable to do and what you're not comfortable to do, because there's people with families or children that they're like, well, I wouldn't want to go to a conflict zone, and that's perfectly fine. But then it's about finding an organization that kind of works within the parameters that you're looking for, and I think also finding an organization that aligns with your principles and ethics. And for me, that's Red Cross. I just, like I said before, I find their history and what they've achieved like incredible, and I think it's super important, and I want to advocate for it.
Would you be willing to, I'll put the photos back up, just talk us through some of the other ones before we sort of wrap this up?
Other questions? I mean, there's probably some bullets that we found somewhere. That's our premises that was hit by a tank shell. There you go, 24th of March. Another bullet. This is just taken over the fence. I think that's the kind of the ball bearings that you're finding in some of the patients. That's where I was sleeping on the floor with my Polaroids. This is the young man. Yeah. And that's his caretaker, the guy who was helping look after him. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Thanks for sharing that.
Not a problem.
To those who are listening to this at a later date on the podcast version, I do encourage you to come actually watch this live webinar video that is being recorded. I've got 2 more questions. The first one is, what's next? Are you looking to deploy again? And then I want to know which country out of all the ones you've been to, which has the best food. But are you looking to deploy again in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, it's on the cards. I'm hoping to return to Gaza. So I'm kind of waiting on kind of everything to align in that respect. And Red Cross are keeping me in the loop. Otherwise, my other plans kind of back home are I'm kind of looking to move a little bit out of emergency nursing, and I'm looking to do some theatre nursing here.
Yeah, right.
I think there's an element of me that's a little bit burnt out from the ED and kind of wanting a bit of a change. And I guess the theatre skill set is something I can take into the humanitarian sector as well. So that's kind of super attractive, and I think there's lots I can kind of learn in that area. So that's my current plans. We'll see where we go.
What happens? Yeah, awesome. And last final question to wrap up. Out of all the countries you've been on deployments, which country's food has surprised you the most? Good or bad?
I think I chose Syria before, but I remember really loving the food in Syria, and actually like Middle East in general. Like the food that I've tried in Gaza, when it's been available, there's some of our national colleagues have shared some of their cooking has been incredible. The struggle is that a lot of ingredients aren't available. So, and that was kind of earlier on. But Middle East, delicious food.
Yum. Look, I want to say thank you, for coming on and, sharing powerful insights. I don't really know what else to describe them as. Thank you to all those who are watching and commenting. Looks like there's quite a few people who have watched this live, so I do thank you for that. So feel free for anyone who's watching to come watch all our other ones. Don't forget, we've got heaps of interviews on the Nurse Break and Nurses Collective. JP, massive thank you for coming tonight. What day is it? I've lost track. Wednesday night. I'll catch you offline in a second, but until next time, everybody, take care and please share this, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.